बिस्मिल्लाहिर्रहमानिर्रहीम कालू सुबहानका ला इल्मा लना इल्ला मा अल्लमतना इन्नका अंतल अलीमुल हकीम. We started this series of balances, and first two lectures were on the water and electrolyte balance, and we did the basic physiological parameters on which we plan our fluid therapy. Then we discussed a practical approach to fluid therapy in different diseases. Now in the balance, once the body is in water and electrolyte balance, then we have to look at the acid-base balance. And today we'll do the physiological basis of acid-base balance. Now, in acid-base balance, there are few things which we'll have to discuss: terminology, then we'll discuss the physiological compensation by the body, then pathophysiological disturbances, and then practical approach to assessment, then biological reports and case history. Normally, to cover up this whole subject, it requires around about 4 to 5 lectures, but we'll finish in these 2 lectures. The simple thing which we use every day: acid. What is an acid? Acid is a substance which dissociates to produce hydrogen ions. What is base? Base is a substance which accepts a hydrogen ion. Then what is alkali? Alkali is a substance which dissociates to produce hydroxyl ion. Product of metabolism is hydrogen ion, not a hydroxyl ion. So the body tends to go into acidosis rather going into alkalosis. When the baby is lying in the body of uterus, baby is used to acidosis. That's why, so whenever you deal with the acidosis, try not to overdo it, because our body is not used to alkalosis, so we very gradually we correct the acidosis. Buffering and buffer. Buffering is a process by which strong acid is converted into weak acid, and the hydrogen ions which are released brunt is taken up by another substance which is called buffer, with a change in pH of little change in pH, and that whole process is called buffering. And we'll discuss in detail later on. pH. pH indicates you about the hydrogen ion concentration of the body. It is indirect way of measuring hydrogen ion concentration. It is a log of hydrogen ion concentration in the body. But you can calculate the hydrogen ion also if you know the PCO2, and then you also know the bicarbonate, and you multiply the PCO2 if you are measuring in millimeter of mercury with 24. That is a figure which has been taken up, and divided by bicarbonate. That will give you the hydrogen ion concentration. If you measure directly hydrogen ion concentration, it is measured in nanomole per liter. Nowadays in the Western countries, they do not look at the pH, they always look at what is the hydrogen ion concentration. It is the direct measurement. It can give you the idea that how much hydrogen ion. If it is 4, then normal is 40 nanomoles per liter. If it is increasing in number, it means the body is going in acidosis. But if you look at the pH, if the pH is increased, it means you are going into alkalosis. So it is indirect way of assessing the acidity or alkalinity if you look at the pH. Normal products of metabolism are hydrogen ion, carbon dioxide. Now hydrogen ion is produced by a process which is called anaerobic metabolism. And carbon dioxide is a product of aerobic metabolism. If you look at it, it's a CO2, one molecule of carbon combining with 2 molecules of oxygen. For the production of carbon dioxide, you need 2 oxygen there. So it means when the body is producing carbon dioxide, when there is a hypercarbia, it means at cell level aerobic metabolism is going on. There is some problem to eliminate the carbon dioxide. Now, how does the body deal with it? Hydrogen ions are incorporated into water. That's what happened. Hydrogen ion combines with the bicarbonate under the action of enzyme called carbonic anhydrase or carbonate dehydratase, and it forms H2CO3. H2CO3 again under the action of same enzyme dissociates into carbon dioxide and water. and carbon dioxide washes through the lung, water is dealt by the kidney. Then hydrogen ion is also lost from the body through the kidney and through the intestine also. So by regeneration mechanism or reabsorption mechanism, which we will discuss a little bit later. Now what happens to carbon dioxide? Carbon dioxide, it stimulates the chemoreceptors in the hypothalamus. Patient starts breathing fast and it's washed out. Then bicarbonate is the main parameter when we look at it. To look at the metabolic element, there are three mechanisms they deal with the bicarbonate, or the bicarbonate is produced by three mechanisms. One is bicarbonate generation by erythrocyte, then bicarbonate reabsorption in the renal tubule, then bicarbonate generation in the renal tubules. It's very simple, but it needs a little bit of understanding. Now, if you look at this, this is a RBC. This yellow thing is RBC. So, what will happen to it? In the blood, in the RBC, carbon dioxide goes into the RBC. From where the carbon dioxide comes? Carbon dioxide comes under the pressure gradient from the tissue into plasma. Then from plasma, it goes into the RBC. Why does it go into RBC? Because gases, whether there is gases or liquid, they always travel due to pressure gradient. So there is higher pressure in the plasma than inside the RBC. Why there is less pressure in the RBC? Because there is no mitochondria. All the cells of the body has got mitochondria except RBC. Why hasn't the God put the mitochondria there? If the God has put in the mitochondria over there, it would have produced carbon dioxide. So then there would not be any pressure gradient between the plasma PCO2 and intra-erythrocyte PCO2. Then there will not be any carbon dioxide going into the cell. This whole process would have stopped. We would have died in the uterus. So this is a natural way of going physiological basis. Carbon dioxide goes inside the RBC. It combines with the water which is present in the RBC. And there is the enzyme which is called carbonic anhydrase. There are only three sites in the body where carbonic anhydrase is present. One is RBC, other is gastromucosa, third is eye. There are three places. So in all these three places, you should know what do they do. In the stomach, they produce also acidity. They control the intraocular pressure by producing aqueous. Then carbon dioxide combining with the water produce H2CO3. Now H2CO3 immediately dissociates into H and HCO3, hydrogen ion plus bicarbonate. Now H will combine with the hemoglobin in the RBC because hemoglobin has just unloaded oxygen. Oxygen gone out of the RBC, now the site is empty. Now the hydrogen ion combines with it, it forms HHB. Now bicarbonate concentration in the RBC is increased. Now this bicarbonate, due to concentration gradient, goes into the plasma. Now negative ion has gone into the plasma. Either one positive ion should go out or one negative ion should come in. Immediately available, easily diffusible, negative ion is a chloride. Then the chloride goes inside the cell. This is called chloride shift. Now, while staying over here, still RBC is in the periphery, is at the capillary level. What have you used inside? You have used water in the RBC. So it means when it has used the water in the RBC, there should be shortage of water in the RBC. If we don't do anything at this stage, then the RBC will start breaking up. So the water from the plasma starts going inside the RBC to keep its shape. So it means there will be deficiency of water in the venous blood. So that's why the hematocrit of venous blood is higher than that of arterial blood. So this is the explanation. This is a fundamental fact that hematocrit of venous blood is higher than that of arterial blood. It means the venous blood is more thicker as compared to arterial blood. Now the same blood, when it goes into the lung, what will happen there? So oxygen is coming from the alveoli, goes into the plasma, goes into the RBC and pushes the hydrogen ion. out. So it sits on the hemoglobin. Now this hydrogen ion which has been released, it will combine with a bicarbonate and to form H2CO3. Now H2CO3 will dissociate immediately into carbon dioxide and water. Carbon dioxide will come back into the alveoli, and there is excess water now which is produced in the RBC. It will come out and it will normalize the plasma hematocrit. This whole shifting is called chloride shift, and it's very important. It's the first line of defense as well as acid-base balance is concerned. As there are numbers, RBC, we know it's a calculated number of RBCs in the blood, so they will exhaust very quickly. Then the second line of defense is your kidney. In kidney there are two mechanisms: bicarbonate resorption mechanism and bicarbonate generation mechanism. Now we go to the second step, this bicarbonate reabsorption mechanism. Now as a bicarbonate is filtered with the sodium through the glomerulus, when the filtrate goes into the proximal tubule, sodium is reabsorbed, and when the positive ion is reabsorbed, one positive ion should come out. Now this hydrogen ion which has been produced in the proximal tubular epithelium, which has with carbon dioxide, the water form H2CO3, then it dissociates into H and HCO3, and H is excreted against the absorption of the sodium. Now this bicarbonate is combining with the hydrogen and is combining with the bicarbonate, forming H2CO3, and immediately it is converted into carbon dioxide and water. And this whole process takes place in the proximal tubule. As you know from your knowledge of histology, the epithelial cells of the proximal tubule has got brush borders. Why there are brush borders? Because there is a carbonic anhydrase present there that converts the H2CO3 into carbon dioxide and water, and that is excreted as such. Now this is called bicarbonate resorption mechanism. As you see from this whole picture, there is a net loss of hydrogen ion, and there will be same amount of bicarbonate which has been produced goes into plasma. So it means there will not be any net loss or net gain. It just stabilizes a little bit of acid-base disturbance. Now then we go to distal tubule. What happens in distal tubule? Filtrate, when goes there, along with the sodium, there are some other acids go with it. Now, like HPO4 or something like that, when it goes there, sodium is reabsorbed and hydrogen ion is excreted from the cell, and it will combine with, for example, if there is HPO4 going there, then another H will combine, it will form H2PO4. And H2PO4 is not reabsorbed by the renal tubular cells. It will be lost. Same way, ammonia is produced by the tubular cells of distal tubule, NH3. And then hydrogen ion comes and form NH4. NH4 again cannot be reabsorbed. That will be lost also. So there is a net loss of hydrogen ion. It will mean there is a net loss of acidity. Now this acidity which has been lost by the ammonia and by the dihydrogen phosphate, H2PO4, this is called titratable acidity. This is how we measure the acidity which is lost by the kidney in the urine. This is called titratable acidity. This whole process is stimulated by if there is hypercarbia or there is a reduction of bicarbonate. It means both metabolic acidosis and respiratory acidosis, they stimulate this mechanism. Now, disturbance of carbon dioxide takes place, either there is a problem in the lung or there is a problem in the respiratory center. And disturbance of bicarbonate, if it is reduced or increased, this problem is called metabolic problem. And before we go into detail, you look at this. This is typical Henderson-Hasselbalch equation. You must have read in your physiology, and I usually, when I go for examining the students, I usually ask them to write down the spelling. And hardly 90% they fail to write down the spellings. Very simple, but nobody bothers about Henderson-Hasselbalch equation. There are two persons, Henderson and Hasselbalch. Now this equation is pH is equal to pK plus log of proton acceptor or the base divided by proton donor, that is acid, base over acid. Now this is called buffering equation. So there are three buffers in the body. One is bicarbonate and carbonic acid. Second is HPO4 over H2PO4. And the third is NH3 over NH4. But the body has got higher concentration of bicarbonate. So 60% of buffering now in the blood or plasma takes place because of bicarbonate and carbonic acid pair. Now HPO4 phosphate level is very less in the plasma. It is 1 milliequivalent per liter. So need to have around about 20 to 24 milliequivalent per liter to be effective as a buffer pair. So it is effective when the filtrate goes from the proximal tubule into distal tubule. In the proximal tubule, the filtrate has got a concentration of phosphate of 1 milliequivalent per liter. By the time 70% of water is reabsorbed in the proximal tubule, so it becomes concentrated. Then 5% in loop, 15% distal tubule. Then the level of phosphate becomes 24 milliequivalent per liter in the distal tubule. Then this buffer becomes effective. HPO4 over H2PO4, that's effective only in the distal tubule. The ammonia is secreted by the tubule and it consumes hydrogen ion, is converted into ammonium, NH4. So that's entirely present in the kidney. It's not present in the plasma. So any substance, buffer pair which has got pK near to the pH is the most effective. Bicarbonate pK is 6.1 and the pK of phosphate pair is 6.8. Although the pK is near to the pH of biphosphate, but its concentration is so low, it does not become effective buffer in the plasma. It becomes effective in the distal tubule. Now, if you put in bicarbonate over carbonic acid can be derived from PCO2. If you multiply the PCO2 with 0.03, so if you are measuring the PCO2 in millimeter of mercury, but if you are measuring the PCO2 in kilopascal, then you multiply with 0.225. It depends on how your blood gas analyzer gives you the result. So if you delete all other things, you keep the buffer pair like this, bicarbonate divided by PCO2 multiplied with 0.03. So if the upper portion of the equation is disturbed, this is called metabolic problem. If the lower portion of equation is concerned, it is called respiratory problem. This is simple. So if there is acidosis, the bicarbonate is reduced. So the ratio becomes less. And if there is an increase in bicarbonate, then the equation is increased, so it is called alkalosis. So same way if you look on the respiratory side, in acidosis, so PCO2 is increased, so ratio is decreased. And if the PCO2 is washed out, so then the ratio is increased. So in that way, if you look at both the acidosis, they will decrease the ratio, and both the alkalosis, they increase the ratio. This is just a theoretical purpose. Now, if I shorten this equation again, in metabolic acidosis, there is a reduction in bicarbonate. So it is the opposite partner, the lower part of the equation, that tries to compensate it. So it means if there is acidosis, the respiratory center will be stimulated, patient will hyperventilate, it will wash out the CO2, so the PCO2 goes down. That's how it is corrected. If you look at the respiratory acidosis, if the PCO2 is increased, bicarbonate is less. So if there is a PCO2 is increased, bicarbonate is a byproduct of carbon dioxide, because the carbon dioxide plus water forms H2CO3, and that is H and HCO3, so the bicarbonate level goes up. So the correction is by increasing the bicarbonate. Then in metabolic alkalosis, bicarbonate is increased. So when the bicarbonate is increased, the respiratory center is depressed. That will try to accumulate the CO2. That will try to compensate it by increasing PCO2. Same way in the respiratory alkalosis, the PCO2 has been washed out. But when the PCO2 is washed out, so the carbon dioxide production is reduced. So they'll try to correct this whole equation. Now, out of all these disturbances, whether it is a respiratory or metabolic, whether it is acute or chronic, so there are most important is the acidosis. And out of acidosis, metabolic acidosis is the most important. So there are only 9 causes of metabolic acidosis in the body, if you remember that way. Otherwise, if you go into the problem of anion gap and delta ratio, which I'll discuss at the end of the whole lecture. So if you have got the 9 causes in front of you, you can diagnose it. Out of 9, there are 4 or 5 are lying in the kidney, like glomerular failure, ketoacidosis, then you got lactic acidosis, intestinal enlargement, renal tubular failure, acetazolamide therapy, then renal tubular acidosis, ureteric transplantation into the gut, and ammonium chloride therapy. All these 9 causes. So it is very easy to scrutinize that what is the causative factor in this particular patient. Then I have further made my own classification. If you look at the glomerular failure, ketoacidosis, lactic acidosis, these are 3 causes in which the potassium will be raised. So it will be hyperkalemic metabolic acidosis. Then intestinal loss is variable from where you are losing. If you are losing from the stomach or you are losing from the lower gut. Then renal tubular failure, acetazolamide therapy, and renal tubular acidosis, they cause hypokalemic acidosis. Although there is acidosis, but the potassium is also lost. Then you have got renal tubular failure, acetazolamide therapy, renal tubular failure, all these hypokalemic. Then ureteric transplantation, ammonium chloride therapy, they cause hyperkalemic metabolic acidosis. Out of these 2, hyperkalemic and hypokalemic metabolic acidosis. It sounds a little bit complicated, but it's not complicated. So we can go through all the causes one by one. Like if there is a glomerular failure, why the body goes into acidosis? When there is glomerular failure, less filtration takes place. There is less sodium in the proximal tubule. So less sodium will be reabsorbed and less hydrogen ion will be exchanged with it. So it means acidity will be left in the body. It will not be lost and exchanged with the sodium. It means the bicarbonate resorption mechanism fails. So that hydrogen ion which has accumulated, hydrogen will tend to go inside the cell and push the potassium out. So there will be hyperkalemia with metabolic acidosis. Then if you look at the ketoacidosis and lactic acidosis, ketoacidosis, if the ketones are produced, what are the ketones? There are 3 ketones in the body, so they are directly pouring the hydrogen ions there. When they are directly producing hydrogen ion, it's consuming bicarbonate. When it's consuming bicarbonate, the upper portion of the equation is reduced, and hydrogen ion going into the cell, and the potassium is raised. So there will be hyperkalemia with metabolic acidosis. Lactic acidosis. What is the cause of lactic acidosis? It's hypoxia is the main cause. Or some of the drugs like metformin, fenformin, all those drugs, they cause also metabolic acidosis, lactic acidosis. So lactic acid itself is an acid. So it will be direct rising of hydrogen ion that will go inside the cell and push the potassium out. And that will raise the hydrogen ion concentration. That will take the body into metabolic acidosis. So there will be metabolic acidosis with hyperkalemia. Now we come to renal tubular failure. If the tube is failing, proximal tubule or distal tubule, the renal tubules cannot reabsorb the sodium. If they cannot reabsorb the sodium, so either the sodium, the hydrogen ion cannot be exchanged with it. So hydrogen ion are retained inside the body, and the sodium, when it is reabsorbed, it is exchanged with the potassium. So, and when the sodium is exchanged with the potassium, the anion which goes with the sodium is a chloride. So there will be increase in chloride in the plasma and the loss of potassium as the hydrogen ion cannot be exchanged. So body goes into acidosis with hyperchloremia and hypokalemia. So hyperchloremic, hypokalemic metabolic acidosis. right? Then we go to acetazolamide therapy. What is acetazolamide therapy? Acetazolamide is a carbonic anhydrase inhibitor. So it is inhibiting the reaction inside the epithelial cell, the renal tubule, of carbon dioxide combining with the water forming H2CO3. So it means hydrogen ion is not free to be exchanged with the sodium. So what is free to be exchanged? Either it should be potassium, so the body loses potassium. In exchange with the potassium, sodium is reabsorbed, anion which goes with the sodium inside the cell is a chloride. So the chloride excess is there and the loss of potassium. So then body goes into hypokalemic, hyperchloremic metabolic acidosis. It's very easy to diagnose from just looking at the chloride and the potassium. You can find out the causative factor. Then renal tubular acidosis itself is entity. There are three mechanisms which take place, could be causative factor. One thing is the renal tubule failed to secrete the acid. And second is, if they are secreted, it is reabsorbed again. The third is body loses bicarbonate. So there are three mechanisms. The most common is the renal tubular cells fail to secrete the hydrogen ion in exchange with the sodium. So what will be excreted then? When the sodium is reabsorbed, in exchange potassium is lost, body goes into hypokalemia. As the hydrogen cannot come out, this will cause acidosis. Anion which goes with the sodium to be exchanged with the potassium will be chloride. That will cause hyperchloremia. So it will be hyperchloremic, hypokalemic metabolic acidosis. So in other words, hyperchloremic, hypokalemic metabolic acidosis, there are only three causes: renal tubular failure, acetazolamide therapy, and renal tubular acidosis. Then if you transplant, as a urologist, they transplant if there is a problem with the ureter when it is joining the bladder, if there is a tumor. What they do is they transplant this ureter into the gut, whether it is ileum or jejunum or in the colon. So then the urine is coming into the gut. When urine is coming into the gut, along with the urine, ammonium is coming also, NH3, NH4. NH4Cl, NH4 chloride. So this NH4 cannot be reabsorbed by the renal tubular cells. But once it comes into the gut, it dissociates into NH3 and chloride. And the chloride is reabsorbed by the gut mucosa. When the chloride is reabsorbed, in exchange with the chloride, the bicarbonate is lost, or acid is lost also. The body goes into bicarbonate is lost. The body goes into acidosis. As the chloride is reabsorbed, it causes hyperchloremia. So there will be hyperchloremic metabolic acid by the transplantation of ureter into the gut. That's why they advise the diet. These urologists give the specific diet so that the body should not go into acidosis. So this is what happened in ureteric transplantation. Ammonium chloride therapy used to be used in alkalosis. They used to give intravenous therapy of ammonium chloride. Now you can give NH4 plus chloride with it. Chloride will cause hyperchloremia. NH4 will dissociate in the liver into H and NH3. Now H will cause acidosis, that will be metabolic acidosis, and two NH3 molecules will combine to form urea. So it will cause rising of urea, metabolic acidosis with hyperchloremia. And the potassium will be increased also because this acid will go inside the cell and potassium comes out. So very simple explanations of all these causes. Now, according to this classification, hyperkalemic metabolic acidosis are three: glomerular failure, ketoacidosis, and lactic acidosis. And causes of metabolic acidosis, of hypokalemic metabolic acidosis, renal tubular failure or acetazolamide therapy, and renal tubular acidosis. Then metabolic acidosis with hyperchloremic acidosis, that is acetazolamide therapy, renal tubular acidosis, ureteric transplantation, and ammonium chloride therapy. Once I gave these few questions, multiple choice question in the FCPS examination, surgicals, marhoom Professor, he asked me to give a few questions. I gave a question. None of them could give the answer of these questions, although these are very simple. If you think about it, it's very simple. This is a very simple topic, and nobody concentrates on the blood gases. Then, hyperchloremic, hypokalemic metabolic acidosis, only two: acetazolamide therapy and renal tubular acidosis. Right. From here to scrutinize these 9 causes, you need only 4 tests. In addition to ABG, you look at the blood glucose, because this is one of the causes of ketoacidosis. Then look at the urine blood kine zone. They will help to diagnose the ketoacidosis. Then serum chloride and serum potassium. You don't need any other test to differentiate between 9 causes of metabolic acidosis. Right? Then respiratory acidosis. It could be acute respiratory failure, and it is a chronic respiratory failure. There are so many causes of those. Then acute respiratory failure, the erythrocytes is the first line of defense. They come into action. In chronic respiratory failure, renal generation mechanism come into action. Right? Then metabolic alkalosis. There are 3 causes. Administration of bicarbonate. If you gave too much bicarbonate, when you are correcting the potassium, or when the patient is in cardiac arrest, you are reviving, you give too much soda bicarb, and you can take the patient into metabolic alkalosis. That's why when you calculate that you have to give alkali, give 50% of that. Then after half an hour or 15-20 minutes, take another sample, then calculate again how much alkali is required, then again you give 50% till it is corrected. Then if there is hypokalemia, now hypokalemia causes metabolic alkalosis, and metabolic alkalosis causes hypokalemia. Do you agree with it? If there is less potassium, hypokalemia in the plasma, there is less potassium in the plasma, what will happen? Potassium starts coming from the cell, right, to correct that. As the positive one is coming, so one positive one should go inside the cell. That is hydrogen ion. Hydrogen ion starts going into the cell. So there will be deficiency of hydrogen ion outside the cell. So then the body goes into alkalosis. So with the hypokalemia, there will be alkalosis. Now if there is alkalosis, hydrogen ion starts coming from the cell. If the positive one is coming out of cell, one positive one should go inside. That's the potassium. Potassium goes inside, and that will cause hypokalemia. So whenever you look into the ABGs, always look like this. So if there is a metabolic alkalosis, it will cause hypokalemia. If there is a hypokalemia, it will cause metabolic alkalosis. Then pyloric stenosis. Pyloric stenosis is particularly in newborns, neonates, there is hypertrophic pyloric stenosis. They start vomiting. Now, if you look at your nasogastric tube also, you put the nasogastric tube into the stomach and go on sucking out the secretions from there. We think we are taking out the bad liquids from there, but actually you are damaging the person. These have got enzyme in it, these have got electrolytes in it. Now, if person is vomiting, what is he losing? Losing water, losing sodium, losing potassium, losing chloride, and to some extent losing magnesium also. Now, water loss will cause hypovolemia, cause hypotension. Potassium loss will take into hypokalemia. Sodium loss does not do anything because all the secretions of the body, they have got sodium level less than that of plasma. It doesn't matter how much you vomit. It doesn't matter how much you perspire. It doesn't matter how fast you breathe. It doesn't matter how much you sweat. You will not lose more sodium. It is a bad therapy. If you start giving them fluids which have got less sodium, like Plavolitam, you will take the person into hyponatremia. So sodium, just forget about sodium. So there will be hypokalemia, and along with that, you are losing chloride also. There will be hypochloremia. So hydrogen ion will cause alkalosis, water loss will cause hypovolemia, potassium will cause hypokalemia, chloride will cause hypochloremia. Now the same plasma goes into the glomerulus and is filtered. In the proximal tubule, there is alkalotic fluid, and it has got hypokalemia, it has got hypochloremia. Then in the proximal tubule, when the sodium is reabsorbed, it is always coupled with the chloride. If there is less chloride in the plasma, in the filtrate, so less sodium will be reabsorbed. It means the bulk of sodium and so water will not be reabsorbed. Bulk of sodium, bulk of water goes into distal tubule, and there will be more than normal amount of sodium reabsorbed because it is more than normal is available there, and more than normal amount of hydrogen will be lost in exchange with the sodium. So body further goes into alkalosis. So what is the culprit? Culprit is a chloride. So, and this chloride, because there is more reabsorption of sodium, so more loss of potassium also in exchange with sodium. So body further goes into hypokalemia. So you cannot correct the hypokalemia until you start giving them chloride. And in the last lecture also I told you, so always give them saline first, start saline, then start correcting the potassium. You will see that you can correct it easily, because with the giving saline, you are giving chloride. And the chloride is the main culprit which is stopping the reabsorption of sodium in the proximal tubule. So we'll see the result immediately, and at the same time you start giving potassium, neat potassium in the pump. So that's how we correct it. We give saline solution is ideal if the patient is vomiting or if you're putting a nasogastric tube and goes into electrolyte and iso-base disturbance. So this is very important because we got a lot of patients in ICU also who has been vomiting and they are blood pressure low, tachycardia, periphery is cold, and you put a CVP catheter, it's very central venous pressure is low. If you look at the electrolyte, they are hypokalemic, hypochloremic. So, and if they are already given low sodium solution, and that causes hyponatremia also. It's very easy to correct it, and correct it according to the fluid speed, because as I told you last time, whenever you plan your fluid therapy, you always ask 4 questions from yourself. First question, does the patient need any fluid or not? Second question, how much should be given? Third question is, what type of fluid should be given? Fourth question, at what speed it should be given? So always ask from yourself these 4 questions. So then you decide which compartment you want to fill in. You want to fill the vessel, you want to fill the interstitial compartment, or you want to fill intercellular compartment. And accordingly you pick out the fluid and then you start your fluid therapy. It's not difficult, it's very easy. So whenever you plan your fluid therapy, you always spend 4 or 5 minutes on it to decide what type of fluid you are going to give and how much and at what speed you should give it. Because this is the most important for the recovery of the patient. It will reduce the morbidity and mortality, and it will also reduce the number of days the patient will be staying in the hospital. Then respiratory alkalosis. If the patient is hyperventilating, there are so many causes: hysteric, overbreathing. Then if there is increased intracranial pressure, brain stem injury, hypoxia, pulmonary edema, lobar pneumonia, pulmonary collapse, excessive artificial ventilation. We put on the ventilator, we given increased tidal volume, increased rate. So all these are the causative factors of respiratory alkalosis. It's very easy to diagnose. Now, what are to know the abnormality, you must know the normal levels. PCO2, partial pressure of oxygen in the arterial blood. If sometimes we put PCO2, sometimes we put P small a o CO2. So arterial, small a shows arterial. If it is a big A, that shows alveolar. Now normal is, range is 30 to 50. Exact is 40 millimeter of mercury, if you are measuring in millimeter of mercury. Or if you are measuring in kilopascal, 7.5 millimeter of mercury equal to 1 kilopascal. So you divide it by that, so it comes to be 4 to 6.6 kilopascal. Now if it is greater than 50 millimeter of mercury or greater than 6.6 kilopascal, it means it's a respiratory acidosis. If it is less than 30 millimeter of mercury or less than 4 kilopascal, it is respiratory alkalosis. And rest of the thing between 30 and 50, these are the compensatory ranges. They are compensatory ranges. Right? pH. Normal pH is 7.4. If it is between 7.4 and 7.3, it is compensated pH on the acidic side. If it is between 7.4 and 7.5, it is compensated pH on the alkalosis side. Normally, on every blood gas report they are written, normally 7.4 to 7.45, 7.35 to 7.45. This is wrong. Absolute normal is 7.4. There is a range of compensation from 7.3 to 7.5. On 7.3 to 7.4, it is compensation on the acidic side. On from 7.4 to 7.5, it is compensation on the alkalosis side. Right? Then there are few relationships which are very important before we discuss how to interpret the blood gases. PCO2 and pH. Now, PCO2, if you increase the PCO2, 20 millimeter of mercury, it will affect the pH by 0.1 pH. Now, if you decrease the PCO2 by 10 millimeter of mercury, it will have the same effect, 0.1. It means you will have to increase the double to have the change in the pH of 0.1, and you have to have a half of effect on the alkalosis side, because our body is used to acidosis, not to alkalosis. It tolerates very badly because the normal product of metabolism is hydrogen, not hydroxyl, not OH. Right? Then PCO2 and ventilation. When the person is running, he is breathing fast, and at the same time his cardiovascular system is stimulated also. The blood pressure is increased, heart rate is increased. So it is increasing also. It is producing more carbon dioxide. Now, if you take the normal patient or any patient and put them straight away on the ventilator and you hyperventilate, that is a different condition. There is no compensation. So you'll have to be very careful looking at the ABGs. Then PO2 and normal range. What is the normal PO2? कितना होता है? How much is the normal PO2? Roughly around about say 100. And how much is the oxygen you are breathing in? 20%, roughly 20%. What is the ratio between it? 20% to you are expecting 100. So 1 to 5 ratio. Whenever you are giving percentage of oxygen to a patient, always multiply it with 5, and that should be your expected PO2 of that patient. Right? Well, I will discuss hypoxia later on. Then PO2 and FiO2 ratio, PCO2 and temperature. When the temperature increases, metabolism increases. When metabolism increases, there will be production of carbon dioxide more. See, on the other hand, if the PCO2 increases, causes respiratory acidosis. And when you increase the temperature also, both of these will shift the oxygen dissociation curve towards the right. When it shifts towards the right, it means the combined form will be reduced, but the concentration of the plasma will increase. It means the PCO2 will increase this PO2 will increase because it will not be able to combine with it. So if you look at the person who is running a temperature, if you look at their saturation tends to drop, but partial pressure oxygen tends to go up because oxygen dissociation curve has shifted towards the right. The hemoglobin is not in a mood to accept it. Hemoglobin is in dissociation period. It starts refusing taking the oxygen with it. Now there are terminology like acidemia. Acidemia, when there is a reduction in pH in the plasma. We look at only at the pH, and if you say the pH is 7.3 or less, we say there is acidemia. We don't label it as acidosis. Same with the alkalemia. When the pH is greater than 7.5, we'll say it is a alkalemia. It's not alkalosis. Until and unless we look at the base deficit. So if there is a base deficit present, then we label it as a acidosis. It means when you look at the ABGs at a cell level, then you can label it as acidosis. When the base excess is present, in addition to alkalemia, we label it as a alkalosis. So when it is osis, it means at its tissue level. When emia, it means it's only in the plasma. So if you look only at the pH, whether it is increase or less, that is anemia. When it is oocyst, it means it is something happening at the cell level. So then we'll have to look at the base deficit or base excess. How to assess the blood gases? There is one step which is called assessment of acid-base balance. Step 2, assessment of hypoxemic state. And the third is assessment of tissue oxygenation state. If you have done these 3 steps, it means you have interpreted the ABGs properly. Look at the acidity or alkalinity, then you look at the oxygen status, then you look at the tissue oxygenation status. Because when I'll give you for rehearsal, then we'll explain it in a better way. Now, there are only 2, either acidosis or alkalosis. And in acidosis, there is a metabolic acidosis and respiratory acidosis. And they are all chronic acute. Chronic means compensated or uncompensated. But on metabolic acid side, it's uncompensated or compensated, partially compensated or fully compensated. So during the rehearsal, I'll show you how to diagnose this. The same way is the alkalosis. Metabolic alkalosis, respiratory alkalosis. Could be acute, could be chronic. Right. In diagnosing, assessment of first step is acid base. If it is acute, it's been called uncompensated. If it is a chronic, it is called compensated. Then again, fully compensated or partially compensated. Now, compensated pH is 7.3 to 7.5, as I've already told you. Then how do we diagnose? Always look at the blood gases in the same sequence. Look at the pH first. Then you look at the PCO2. Then you look at the bicarbonate. There is no oxygen in it. Oxygen does not help you to diagnose acidity or alkalinity. Oxygen is only considered is the only causative factor of disturbance of acidity or alkalinity. And oxygen is only for step 2, hypoxemic state. But it does not help us in diagnosing the acidity or alkalinity. Look at the pH first, then you look at the PCO2, then you look at the bicarbonate. It means pH will tell you whether it is acidosis or alkalosis. PCO2 will tell you whether it is a respiratory cause or not. Then bicarbonate will tell you whether it is a metabolic cause or not. But always remember, normal pH is 7.4. It's not 7.4 to 7.5. 7.35 to 7.45. Then compensatory range is 7.3 to 7.5. PCO2 normal 40 millimeter of mercury. Compensated PCO2 is 30 to 50. The normality you should always keep in your mind. So when if you should go in the same sequence, if pH is low, that shows acidosis. Then look at the PCO2. If the PCO2 is high, could be respiratory acidosis. Now, if pH is low, it shows acidosis. Then you look at the PCO2. If the PCO2 is normal or low, so this cannot be causative factor. Then you look at the bicarbonate. It is low, so it means it is a metabolic acidosis. So if you make your habit to go in the same sequence, you cannot miss it. If you want to be brave and want to tell within 1 second to your senior that this is respiratory, this is metabolic, this is respiratory, you will always do some mistake. Take your time to analyze the thing. When I ask my nurses, I always tell them, explain this. I never ask them diagnose it. I say explain it. They analyze the pH, they should tell about the pH, then they should tell about the PCO2, then they should tell about the bicarbonate. Then at the end they should conclude, most probably this is the causative factor. Then we look at the PaO2. Then we try to analyze whole thing. Right? Now if the pH is high, that shows alkalosis, irrespective of cause, whether it is a metabolic or respiratory. Then you look at second step, you look at the PCO2. If the PCO2 is low, it means it's a respiratory alkalosis. If pH is high, PCO2 is normal or high, look at the bicarbonate. If it is high, that shows metabolic alkalosis. Now look for compensation. So you go in the same sequence. Whenever you lose the sequence, you will lose the diagnosis. Look at pH first, then you look at the PCO2, then you look at the bicarbonate. There is no mention of oxygen at all in diagnosing the acid-base disturbance. Right? Now, it gives you some simple one first, then we'll go into complicated. Now, pH is 7.26, PCO2 is 56, bicarbonate is 24. What is this? pH is 7.25. What does it show? It shows acidosis, isn't it? pH is 7.2, it shows acidosis. Then you look at the PCO2, PCO2 is 56. This could be causative factor. Then you look at the bicarbonate, bicarbonate is normal. So it is respiratory acidosis. As it is outside the less than 7.3, so there is no compensation. It's acute respiratory acidosis, acute respiratory failure. Then you look at the second, 7.38 is a pH. Look at the PCO2, it's 76. Now the bicarbonate is 24. Now, just loudly, I always talk to myself also. I looked at the pH. pH shows alkalosis, 7.3, acidosis, 7.38. And PCO2 is 76. This is a causative factor. And bicarbonate is still normal. But pH has moved between 7.3 and 7.4. It means it has compensated. It has compensated respiratory failure, COPD. COPD वाले होते हैं ये patient. Then look at the pH, 7.20, PCO2 is 40, bicarbonate is 9. Analyze it. Speak up. Analyze it. No, never go to conclusion. We don't want diagnosis. pH is 7.20. That's very low. That shows acidosis. Look at the PCO2. It's a 40. It's a normal. It cannot be respiratory element. Then you look at the bicarbonate. Bicarbonate should be 22 to 24. It is a 9. It's a metabolic element. It's a metabolic acidosis. Then you look at the pH again. Has it come into the compensatory range or not? No, it is outside the compensatory range. It is less than 7.3. It is uncompensated metabolic acidosis. Is that right? Then pH is 7.36 and PCO2 is 25. Bicarbonate is 15. Now it's the same way. pH is 7.36. It is in the compensatory range. Then look at the PCO2. PCO2 is low because this cannot be the causative factor for acidosis. But bicarbonate is 15. It is less. This is the causative factor. So it is compensated metabolic acidosis. And the patient must be hyperventilating, washing out the CO2. Then pH 7.60, PCO2 25, and bicarbonate is 24. Respiratory. pH is 7.6. That shows alkalosis. And it is outside the compensatory range. Compensatory range is between 7.3 to 7.5. And look at the PCO2 25. It is less than 30. This is the causative factor. Then look at the bicarbonate. Bicarbonate is 15. So, what is this? Sorry, yeah, the bicarbonate is 24. Bicarbonate is normal. So, lowering of PCO2 is causing alkalosis and is uncompensated respiratory alkalosis. And the last of all, pH is 7.56, PCO2 is 44, and bicarbonate is 38. No, explain करेगो एक explain कर दे. pH is 7.56. That shows alkalosis and it's outside the compensatory range. And then PCO2 is 44. Can this cause alkalosis? No. Then you look at the bicarbonate, 38, very high. It's a metabolic element. And it is metabolic element. It has got alkalosis that has suppressed the respiratory center and is accumulating CO2 also. So it is partially compensated. It's not completely compensated, right? So the metabolic element में आप हमेशा partially compensated, fully compensated, वो आगे जाके मैं आपसे रिहर्सल कराऊंगा, ठीक है? Now we come to second step, hypoxemic state. Below 60 years of age, the normal PO2 is round about 97 to 100 or 13 kilopascal. right? Acceptable range, it should be greater than 80 millimeter of mercury or 10.6 kilopascal, right? Mild hypoxemia, we label it when it is less than 80 and greater than 60. Then moderate hypoxemia, we consider when it is less than 60, more than 40. Severe hypoxemia, when it is less than 40. ये है आपकी डिवीजन है हाइपोक्सिया को. जब आप डायग्नोज करते हैं पेशेंट हाइपोक्सिया, यू मस्ट डायग्नोज इट इज माइल्ड, मॉडरेट और सीवियर हाइपोक्सीमिया. Now, above the age of 60 years of age, subtract 1 millimeter of mercury from minimal 80 millimeter of mercury for every year over 60. This means acceptable range at 60 years age should be greater than 80. At 70, there are 10 years have passed, so 10 millimeter of mercury उसमें से निकाल लें. Then it comes 70 is acceptable. Then at 80, 60 is acceptable. Then at 90, 50 is acceptable. It means whenever you look at the oxygen status, always look at the age of the person also. It is age related. Then above 90, you take the same. Otherwise, you will empty the whole body from oxygen. So 60 to 90, this is the thing, we look at it. If the person comes with 70 years age, we say acceptable. If his PO2 is 75, we say, oh, it's very less. No, it's not less. It is normal for him. So always relate it with the age. Newborn, acceptable age 40 to 70 millimeter mercury. If they send a sample to us to look at the ABG and it is 60, so it is normal for him. Don't expect it should be greater than 80. Why it is less in case of newborn? Any idea? If you look at the surface area of a baby and divide it by body weight, if you look at the surface area of adult divided by body weight, in case of baby it's 3 to 4 times. It means there is more metabolism going on. Because of more metabolism going on, they pick up the oxygen more and the oxygen partial pressure goes down. That's one thing. Second thing is when the baby is born, it has got fetal hemoglobin. When it is fetal hemoglobin, it has got less affinity to 2,3 DPG. It means there is a more affinity to the, not more affinity, there is more sites available for oxygen to combine with it. So oxygen will be saturated very high, but PO2 will be very less. So if the PO2 is less and the oxygen saturation is high, so this is normal for the baby, newborn baby, because of two factors. One is fetal hemoglobin, other is surface area is more. There is more metabolism going on. Oxygen, hypoxemic state still. Oxygen therapy. FiO2 into 5 is expected PO2. Now we are breathing 20%. What is the expected PO2 is 100 roughly. So in 20 to 100 ratio is 1 to 5. If you are giving 30% to the person, you multiply with 5, expected PO2 is 150. If you are giving 100%, expected PO2 is 500. You are giving 100% oxygen, and then you look at the blood gases, we say about 300. We say, oh, it's very good. Now, it's not good. Patient is still hypoxemic. Because expected should be 500. Why it is 300? Then we have to analyze. I will discuss in the examples. Right. Now, uncorrected hypoxemia. You are giving oxygen to correct the hypoxemia. Uncorrected hypoxemic PO2 is less than room air acceptable limit. What is the expected PO2? 80. In spite of giving oxygen, if PO2 is still less than 80, it means uncorrected hypoxemia. Then corrected hypoxemia, if the PO2 is greater than room air acceptable, greater than 80, but less than 100, that is ideal, that's what we require. We don't require the more partial pressure of oxygen. Then excessively corrected hypoxemia, the PO2 is greater than 100 and less than minimal predicted. Minimal predicted if you multiply with the FiO2 with a 5. For example, the person has got, we are giving 30% oxygen, his predicted is 150, but we have taken the sample and its PO2 is 120, that is excessively corrected because it's more than 100. Our target rate, it should be 100, around 100. So it means there could be two causes for this purpose. Yeah, either the person has got, does not require oxygen at all, or the person is hypothermic or hypothyroid. So he's not utilizing the oxygen. So you'll have to think about it. Why is excessively corrected hypoxemia? Oxygen is a toxic gas. Always remember, oxygen is a toxic gas. It can damage more than the hypoxia sometime. Now, there are few steps on which we assess the oxygenation. One is FiO2 to PiO2. What is FiO2? We are having 20%. And under what pressure the oxygen is roaming about in the room? What is the PiO2? Pressure of inspired oxygen. We are looking at the fractional oxygen concentration. But how much is the pressure of this 20% oxygen? You know how to calculate it. What is the atmospheric pressure over here? 760 millimeter of mercury. How much is the water vapor? 760. Water vapor. No? 47. 47 millimeter of mercury. If you 760 minus 47, that is 713. And 713 is the pressure of gases. Out of that, 713 multiplied with 20 divided by 100. It comes out around to be 140 and 145, 150, something like that. So under this pressure, 150 millimeter of mercury, we are getting 20% oxygen going into the lung. As it goes in, when it reaches the alveoli, there is a carbon dioxide which is coming and diluting it. Then the pressure becomes 108 or 110. That's called P big AO2. But in the plasma, it is 100. So the difference is AA gradient, partial pressure of oxygen in the alveoli minus partial pressure of oxygen in the blood. That has to be difference because the things always flow because of pressure gradient. If there is no pressure gradient, then nothing will move. The liquid and the gases always flow because of pressure gradient, from higher pressure to lower pressure. Dalton's law of partial pressure, you must have read in your physics. So then there are additional factors also, coefficient of diffusion or coefficient of dissolve. Then PaO2. How much is the partial pressure of oxygen in the alveoli, big A? Now, PiO2 minus PaCO2. So we are giving oxygen at the pressure of 150. Then, what is the partial pressure of carbon dioxide in the alveoli? That is a 40. And you take 40 from 150, it comes out to be 108 and something like that. So that is P big AO2. Then P small AO2, it's the partial pressure of oxygen in the plasma. Then PAA gradient, that means P big AO2 minus P small AO2, that is called partial pressure gradient in the between the alveoli and the blood. That's very important. There should be gradient before the oxygen can be transferred from the alveoli to the blood. Then you have got ratio also, partial pressure of oxygen in RT blood divided by partial pressure of oxygen in the alveoli. That is need to be 0.67 if you are giving room air. But if you give 100% oxygen, it goes hardly to 0.87, means 87%. Now then, to look at the oxygenation status at the tissue, which we will discuss in detail, DO2, delivery of oxygen to the tissues. It doesn't matter how much is the partial pressure of oxygen in the alveoli. It doesn't matter how much is the partial pressure of oxygen in the plasma. It doesn't matter how much is saturation. But we want to know how much oxygen is being delivered to the tissues. And once it has delivered, then we want to see whether this oxygen is being utilized by the tissues or not. So it means we should know the DO2 delivery, Then we should look how much has been extracted. Then we'll have to see whether the oxygen is being utilized or not. For that purpose, you look at the lactate. If oxygen being utilized, then aerobic metabolism, then lactate should not be produced. If oxygen is sitting there, as in cyanide poisoning, but it's not being utilized, so then the lactate will be produced. So until unless you have completed up to lactate level, looking at the FiO2 and PiO2, P big AO2, P small AO2, saturation of hemoglobin, amount of hemoglobin, because the bulk of oxygen carried by hemoglobin, then DO2, then VO2, then extraction ratio, then you look at the lactate. Once you have done all these, it means you have done the oxygenation status of a patient. Only looking at the saturation. Some people say when they come and look at the saturation, oxygen to badi ja rahi hai. But that doesn't tell you anything. And you look at the saturation, it tells you that oxygen is going through the lung, going into plasma and combining with hemoglobin. That's it. Then we have to look at whether hemoglobin is in a mood to accept oxygen or not. For that purpose, you look at the oxygen dissociation curve. Then we have to analyze that. Thank you.